Early Messages is an activity of the Program for Infant-Toddler Caregivers, developed by WestEd and the California Department of Education.
Mama. Which one do you want? This one? The bunny? Thank you, Nicholas. What do you think? He's got sharp teeth. What else can we make?
Warm spaghetti. I'm making warm spaghetti.
Warm spaghetti?
I'm making warm spaghetti. It's hot right now, so I gotta cool it down.
Did you say hello? Like it. Did you see one of these at the zoo?
Long before children ever say their first words, they are already learning language.
Good morning.
Infants actively build connections between sounds, gestures, and meaning. Their brains are set up to master language.
You're hungry now, right? Well, we'll get you something to eat, okay? You smile?
As infants grow, their biologically built-in potential to learn language unfolds. During the first months of life, infants cry, coo, smile, frown to communicate and get their needs met. They also pick up the rhythmic give and take of their first relationships.
You're smiling, aren't you?
By 8 months, they respond to familiar sounds and selectively babble those sounds. At about a year of age, first words emerge. So do strings of sounds with the rhythm of sentences.
Another wrench, yes. Another wrench.
At around 16 months, children start to experience a language explosion.
Oh, big old brown bear, that's what you're saying. Brown bear. Bye-bye, brown bear.
Typically, toddlers comment, request, and question, first with one word, then 2 words, then simple sentences.
What those?
What is that? That's a polar bear. It's a white polar bear.
This amazing development is rooted in the child's family and culture. The intimate ways parents communicate, their facial expressions, gestures, and sounds reflect their culture, helping infants as young as 1 or 2 months old start to learn the family's language. For example, a child whose home culture emphasizes quiet, respectful interaction with adults will communicate quite differently from a child whose culture emphasizes a lot of talk between adults and children.
Ooh, is it big or little?
It's little.
It's a little one?
Yeah.
Although cultures differ from one another, in all cultures, adults play a fundamental role in language development. And the process of learning language is significantly enhanced when infants have supportive, responsive caregivers.
Open your hand, I can put them inside your hand. There. Should we spray him with some water? Because it feels like he's getting dry.
Adults have a huge impact on language development. Caregivers who spend a lot of time talking with infants help
spray a little bit in
expand the
this?
infants' vocabularies.
Want to spray a little bit in here? Spray
He's
some in here.
dry. He's getting dry.
Should we put some on him too?
Yeah, I'll put some.
You want to do it?
有冇坐車去學校啊？
有。
有啊。
Infants benefit enormously from being bathed in language,
有咧。
but they need caregivers who both talk with them and listen,
媽媽咧？
giving the children a chance to communicate.
係啊。
To help you bathe infants and toddlers in language and enhance their language development, here are 10 powerful strategies.
Can you put them on my hand?
Prompt appropriate responses teach infants the power of their early messages and keep them communicating.
Ooh, what's he feel like?
He feels tipsy.
One way to be responsive to the young infant is to imitate the child's smiles and coos. This helps the infant learn the give and take of communication.
Oh.
I'm hurting my sleeve.
No, you want to hold a baby?
With an older infant, responses that work well connect with the child's words.
I'm taking him off.
Is he moving too fast? I thought snails move slow.
It's particularly important to respond with a comment or question that picks up on the child's idea.
Right there.
As compared with conversations started by their caregivers, conversations initiated by young children last longer, are richer in information, and are more complex.
Roll it out my hair and fall down.
Infants learn language more easily if we give and respond to nonverbal cues. For example, a child will more readily learn the name of an object if we look and point at it when we say its name. 70% of early communication is nonverbal.
Casey found her belly button. You found your belly button? Yes, I see it. It's a beautiful belly button.
Experts now recommend that caregivers observe and then use infant spontaneous gestures to communicate.
Cover you with the blanket? Okay. And pat you there. Yes, I see that. Pat you there. You too. Night, night, Kira. Yeah. Pat you there.
For children with a hearing impairment, manual communication is essential. Like spoken language, sign language provides the foundation for abstract thought and social understanding.
The bunny?
We don't speak to infants and children the way that we speak to one another. We use a different language code, if you will. Some people have called this code child-directed language. And all that means is that when we're talking to children, we talk to them differently.
This one? Emiliano likes that one.
Rabbit.
Yeah, it's a rabbit. You're
We
right.
slow down what we say. We say, would you like a cookie? And it's really slow. When I'm talking to an adult, I'm much more likely to be speedy. Why would we slow it down? Because it's easier for the child to break the language code if we're speaking more slowly. And there are other things that adults do too. We're more likely to repeat it. We might ask the question a couple of times. Again, why the repetition? Because if a child doesn't get it the first time, perhaps they're going to get it the second time. Everything we do is geared towards communication with the child.
Knowing how to modify our communication comes naturally if we attend to the child's cues.
Oh, you're ready to wake up.
When infants look away, become fussy, or don't show any interest in us, we adjust our messages. Here are the various ways to make language understandable for infants.
Now, this one? This one. Do you have a baby you can put to sleep? Do you have a baby? Do you have a baby you can put to sleep, Casey? Which baby? Night, night. Night, night. Night, night. That one? Does she need a blanket? Yeah. A blanket for the baby. A blanket. Can she cover the baby? Oh. Night, night, baby. Night, night. You ready over there? Okay. Night, night. Night, night, baby. Night.
Are you waking up?
Self-talk is describing your own actions as you do them. This technique works especially well during caregiving routines.
Let's put the blanket around you.
It makes things more predictable for infants. After repeated experiences of hearing the same message, the child begins to connect the caregiver's words, like dry, with the child's own sensory experience of being dry.
Thank you. Can I put the dry one on? Let's put the dry one on. You'll feel much better.
Parallel talk refers to describing the child's action or behavior.
You have a sword? Yeah, I see. You built a sword.
I'm boneless.
You bonked him?
Both self and parallel talk help infants connect actions and sensory experiences with language.
Run here. Hello on the telephone.
Another important way to facilitate language development is to help infants and toddlers expand their language.
You are?
With an infant around a year of age, expanding often involves naming something that the child is pointing at.
Yeah.
Baby.
And the baby, too.
When children start to use words, we can add to what they say.
Hello.
Now, a child might come over and say, "to book." And in that case, a caregiver might say, "Yes, you have 2 books." Now, what the adult has done in that situation is teach the child about the use of plural. I mean, the child has said "to book" because the child doesn't know yet that there's a rule. You add an S or ES to words, to nouns, and you make it plural. So the adult has modeled that by expanding on the child's utterance.
My mommy makes the spaghetti in the morning when I go to bed.
In the morning when you go to bed? Is it at night?
No, it's in the morning.
Expansion works best if we simply model correct language, rather than point out mistakes.
You're going to make a choo-choo train?
No, I'm making a cutter choo-choo train.
Oh.
I'm giving you guys some food for your snails.
We can also expand language for children by asking questions or describing things that invite them to talk more.
The pea.
How's he eating it?
Research shows that children do better in school if their parents ask a lot of questions and use descriptive language during the early years. In reporting on this research, Dr. Dolores Norton says it's language that expands the child's world.
It's labeling. Cup, see the tree. The tree has leaves. The leaves are green. It's language that asks questions.
Is he opening his mouth?
No, he's looking it.
It's the language of imparting information.
He's licking it. So does he have a tongue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also the language of imagination. Pretend. Learning about the world through your own mind. I'm a cat. Meow. Any of those kinds of things. Patty cake, patty cake.
This is a jet plane. Oh, my jet plane fell apart.
A jet plane?
Yeah, jet plane.
The most successful expansions build on what the child is interested in. Communication that connects with a child's thought or idea is what makes language meaningful and exciting.
Oh, where did Motivate go? Where did Motivate go? I can't see. Oh, where's Aram?
Wow.
Creating meaningful language experiences for infants who are exposed to more than one language is an important issue for childcare programs.
Oh, the tiger's fighting. They're going to fight.
Young children who are learning 2 languages may learn one faster than the other, and at certain points in development may mix the 2 languages.
Oh.
Casa. Casa.
This is Casa? Casa. Casa. That must be Casa, huh?
Casa is house in Spanish. Yeah. Aquí, here it is.
If program directors and caregivers are patient and consistently communicate that they value the home language, children can retain their family's language and learn English.
What we know is that when you have a good foundation in the primary language, then evidence suggests that learning a second language becomes much easier.
The best way to support bilingual development for infants and toddlers is to have caregivers who speak their home language.
Color. Color.
Without opportunities to use their home language, children will lose it and the ability to communicate with their families.
Program directors and administrators must put a primary emphasis on hiring people who know the language of the children they serve. I can't express this in strong enough terms in these very, very early years and months. It is so important.
But if it isn't possible to find a caregiver who speaks the children's home language, child care programs should create opportunities for the children to hear and use their family's language.
You can put it aquí.
At least a few words of the children's language. It makes for continuity with the home. It says my language is important in this place away from home where there are all kinds of different types of people.
Inviting in volunteers who speak the children's language is a powerful way to support the children's connections with home. Rather than act as translators, volunteers should read, tell stories, sing, chant, and play games in the children's home language. But some things that we may think would help infants and toddlers don't work.
Please don't try to teach language. Please don't say, well, you know, watch me, try to get the phonological stuff. I mean, you see that a lot why? Because caregivers want to help kids. And particularly if the kids don't speak English. So, oh, well, we're going to help you learn English. And so watch my lips, watch this sound. You don't say it that way, you say it this way. And so a 2-year-old, we already know. Developmentally, give me a break.
Caregivers also need to maintain a positive tone and make sure to avoid giving children negative messages about their home language.
Since language also reflects culture and reflects self and self-esteem and self-identity, one has to be very careful in terms of never denigrating it or never making other languages seem more important or better.
¿Cómo se llama esto?
Children benefit from positive messages about their home language. Feeling good about the way their family communicates gives infants a solid foundation for learning English, supports their developing identity. Whether learning one language or two, children master language at their own pace. Some children use new words almost daily.
Mommy, like a big Play-Doh.
Uh-oh.
It's gonna be happy, it's gonna be kind of cut it out.
Other children may just listen to language for months.
Thank you, Marky. I'm gonna put it right
When they start to talk, they often use whole sentences right away. But there may be a child in your care who does not seem to be making progress. In such a case, talk with the child's parents about how the child communicates at home.
So has Ashley been using a lot of her words lately?
Yes.
Also refer to up-to-date information on developmental milestones and warning signs.
No, will not say yes, but she nods yes, and she says no.
If need be, work with the parents to get appropriate professional assessment and support for the child.
Important for them as they're growing up.
Finding ways to adapt to each child's unique learning style is at the heart of enhancing language development. Infants and toddlers who have rich experience with books and stories often have an easier time learning to read when they reach school age. The key to engaging infants in books and stories is to make them fun.
Infants love books, and they are very likely to pull one off a shelf and bring it over to a caregiver. But what they want to do with the book might not always correspond directly with what a caregiver thinks should be done with the book. I mean, what we think is that you open it up, you start at the beginning, you turn the page, and you read what's on the page. An infant might want to start at the back. They might actually want to chomp on the book a little bit. Or they might want to just look at the pictures. And they might want to just point and have things labeled to them. So what I tell caregivers who are working with infants and very young toddlers is to follow their lead. They'll let you know what they want to do with the book. And I don't think we have to be rigid in terms of, you know, we're going to read what's on the printed page no matter what it is. Instead, you know, the book can be used as an object that the young infant is going to explore just like any other object.
Big old brown bear. You have the big brown bear.
Big brown bear.
And you have a big brown bear too.
Heavy.
Yours is heavy. A heavy brown bear book.
Heavy bear.
Heavy brown bear.
Most children like reading because what goes along with it is this marvelous holding, the warmth, you know, feeling the heartbeat of the parent or the caregiver, and the attention that they're giving.
Mr. Moon, Mr. Moon, that moon?
It's always a good idea to have literacy and print available to kids. Keep in mind at early ages, it's not a time to teach them to read, but it is a time to send a message that there are these things called books that have wonderful stories in them. I can't help but remember a caregiver who was talking to a Spanish-speaking mother, and she asked her, do you read to your child as a little girl? And she says, no, I don't, in Spanish, no leo con ella, I don't read with her because I don't know how to read. And then the caregiver says, she doesn't either. So you can make it up. So you can get these stories and you can just see the pictures, and you could tell a story. Just guess what? You could take that same book and you can tell 15 different stories because you can make it up as you go along. It just lit up in her. The mother just says, that's right, I never thought of that.
How about Mrs. Mousy Brown?
As infants grow older, hearing stories fascinates them and stimulates their language development.
To the top, but she couldn't get down. So she called for her grandmother. Grandmother.
Caregivers can tell stories they know and learn stories from the children's families.
Rolled right down.
This is a good way to strengthen connections between childcare and home.
Did you ever see a fishy go swimming in the bay with
Rhyming games, finger play, songs, and pretend play also give infants and toddlers a rich exposure to language. The rhythm and repetition of a rhyme or song helps infants and toddlers learn language.
Children love to sing, and they love to be sung too. Even very, very young infants like to listen to music. If they're not singing along with it because they don't have language yet, they might be moving their body to it in rhythmic ways and understanding that there's a refrain and that things come back again, and so on.
Very well, I thank you. Run away, run away. Where is Pinky? Where is Pinky? Here I am, here I am.
Because singing is repetitive, usually there's a refrain, especially songs for young children, it's a good way to buttress language because a very young toddler might just come in with a couple of words during the chorus. Take a very popular song with young toddlers, The Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round.
the babies on the bus go bouncy, bouncy, bouncy.
The older toddlers might actually be singing the whole refrain, the wheels on the bus go round and round all through the town. But a young toddler might just be getting the round and round part in, or even so, might just be gesturing, so not even words yet. But you go from the gesture to maybe saying round and round, to maybe knowing a couple of verses until finally you've mastered the song. So there's a lot of language learning that can go on during the singing of these repetitive songs that children love so much.
Up and down, all through the town.
Pretend play is another fun and engaging way for children to learn. The language they use in pretend play is often more advanced than the language they use at other times. By playing along, you can give the child important opportunities to experiment and be creative with language.
Putting the lid back.
Childcare programs must provide a calm, quiet environment. It's hard for infants and toddlers to filter out background noise. Large groups, constant music, and television should be avoided. Infants and caregivers need to hear each other to communicate. Sound absorption material can make a big difference. So can setting up quiet areas. Infants and caregivers should have places where they can read, do finger play, and sing together.
Mommy, we're singing songs, singing about the fishy. Victoria.
The environment should also have interesting and familiar things that children can talk about.
That's right, your daddy.
Open-ended play materials, such as blocks, puppets, and dress-up clothes, stimulate children's language and communication.
We have 2 pairs.
It's not surprising that children use more complex language when they engage in open-ended play.
You're looking at his nose?
A peaceful environment that encourages children to express their ideas makes learning language fun and rewarding.
You're right. Where's your head? That's your head. It's a beautiful head.
This video has presented 10 strategies to enhance language development.
I see your beautiful eyes.
Be responsive when children initiate communication.
Can you put them on my hand?
Engage in nonverbal communication.
The bunny?
Use child-directed language. Use self and parallel talk.
Are you waking up?
Hello on the telephone.
Help children expand language.
Who's on the telephone, Mason?
Support bilingual development.
He's scared.
Attend to individual development and needs.
He's gonna go down the slide.
Engage infants with books and stories. Be playful with language. Create a communication-friendly environment. By using these strategies, you'll go a long way in helping children become confident, competent communicators. Caregivers who engage in responsive, rich exchanges with infants make communication and language magical.
I see you. I see you.
How about the babies on the bus? Shall we bounce?
The children on the bus go bouncity, bouncy, bounce. Bouncity, bouncy, bounce. Bouncity, bounce, bounce. The children on the bus go bouncity, bouncy, bounce. All through the town.
The babies
On the bus go bouncity, bouncy, bounce. Bouncity, bounce, bounce. Bounce, bounce, bounce. The babies on the bus go bouncy,